Thank you very much, Mr. Mohapatra. As we move forward, I'm now going to invite on stage Ms. Shaheen Meeran, COO, Co-Location Business, CtrlS Datacentres, to give us the keynote address. Let's welcome her with a big round of applause.
Good evening, everyone. It's very nice to be here amongst 200 distinguished CIOs who are going to be awarded later during the day. My congratulations in advance to all of you. I believe I have about 15 minutes to give you my view of how our lives and our industry, with the context to data centers, is going to change over the next, I would say, 3 to 10 years. And those of you in the room who know me know that I like to do one slide presentation, so that's the good news. Just give me a second while So I wanted to share with you what I believe lies ahead for us as far as data centers go. And when I say data centers, I look at data centers as very complex, mission-critical facilities. So I realized that when I was titling this presentation, it sounded very much like a creepy movie that I had seen maybe a decade ago called What Lies Beneath. But trust me, it's going to be fairly light. One thing that all of us know for a fact and have been reading in the media is that the way forward is cloud. Now, the other corollary that we've been hearing to this is that data centers are going to disappear very soon. Now, I completely differ from that point of view, and I believe that even though the future may be cloud, the cloud is going to run off very large data centers. So data centers are here to stay, and guess what? They're going to get bigger and bigger. And it's not just the cloud which is going to require more and more, I would say, well-engineered data centers, but it's also various tech phenomena that are impacting our lives that are going to require more and more space in data centers. Look at things like gaming, blockchain, personalized medicine, IoT, industrial IoT. All of these things are either going to live in data centers or pass through data centers. And that means data centers are going to get bigger and badder as the years go by. Now, having said this, one big transformation I see in the way we have been looking at data centers, I would say for the past half century or so, we have always treated the IT and the communication devices that we house in these data centers as these very delicate pieces of equipment which require specialized environments and require very, very tightly controlled power and cooling to be delivered to them. I think one change that awaits us all, and I think it began almost a decade ago, is that we are slowly realizing that the equipment we have in data centers is actually quite robust, and it's going to get even more robust. And I see this impacting data centers in 3 ways. One is, for some of you who are aware, ASHRAE has actually gone ahead and told us about 5 years ago that it's okay to run data centers with a wider window of temperature and humidity. Now, what we will realize as the years go by is that what ASHRAE called the recommended envelope and an allowable envelope is going to widen even further. And I strongly believe that possibly a decade down the line, data centers will not require cooling at all. The equipment will be robust enough to deal with whatever be the environmental condition. The second change I see happening is something related to what we experience already with our smartphones. The backup, the battery sits right next to the compute. So very soon what we will see is that the powertrain, where we build so much redundancy and I would say overspend on the kind of infrastructure we need, will very soon become a very light version of a power environment in the data center, where we will, with a modicum of conditioning and possibly the battery right next to within the chassis of the server, see a big change in the way our data centers are laid out and planned. Thirdly, and please bear in mind, I'm talking of a time frame which is 3 to 10 years, I expect that the paranoia we have as an industry in the way we do backup, redundant backup, multiple backup, spend a lot of money on it and therefore also pay the price on OpEx by underutilization of a lot of equipment because of redundancies in the data center. We are going to start looking at redundancies very, very differently within the data center. And I believe the enabler for this will be a technology called IPMI. Some of you may be already familiar with it. It's some great thinking that's come out from Intel. We will see IPMI allow us to invoke redundancies in data centers only when needed, rather than have equipment run on low capacities and low utilization across their lifespan, resulting in very high losses and very high OpEx. The second phenomenon I see impacting us, again, as a community, as an industry, is I believe standards are going to come in a very mature way to us. And all of us who are in business know that today we have either offices that are global or multinational in nature, we have vendors who are global and multinational in nature, and we definitely have customers who are global. One common method to assess how good data centers are in India and other parts of the world is by looking at standards. And standards in the past that we have been familiar with are always oriented towards how do we maximize availability in the data center. So we know tier 1, 2, 3, 4, we know rated 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Now I see two things changing with standards which are going to have a very strong impact on the way we plan, design, and operate data centers. One is the existing standards that we are exposed to somehow almost always originate in the US, more recently in Europe. And I think as a group, we've always felt that, is this really applicable to India? Is it real in India? Now, one maturity we will see in these standards is there's going to be a lot of feedback from India going to the standard defining industry bodies that are writing these standards. And we will have a good portion of these standards, I would think possibly 40%, which will be related to what is called AHJ, authorities having jurisdiction. So for example, if we are sitting at Mumbai, we may not feel a need to have diesel stored at site equivalent to, let's say, 72 hours of backup. We may say 10 hours is adequate, whereas in Chennai, we may feel exactly the opposite. So that flexibility, and I would say the opening of standards to incorporate local nuances, even though they are global in nature, is going to happen. The second thing that's going to happen is that organizations that build very large data centers are going to come up with their own standards. Case in point, look at Facebook. They had this brilliant new way at the turn of the decade where they built a data center in Prineville, which was 40% cheaper in terms of capex and 30% more energy efficient. They did it uniquely, and guess what? They thought, why don't we convert this to a kind of basis of design or Bible call it the Open Compute Project, and open it out to the industry and the world. I think we will see a lot of such standards emerging as the days go by. One other area which was very sadly underrepresented with standards when it came to availability in data centers, we had pages and pages and chapters of content available where we were told how to design a great data center which never fails. But somehow, the fact that it's actually operations and maintenance of the data center and the occasional human error that results in failure on even a data center we spent hundreds of crores to build has been realized very recently. So we are going to see some brilliant standards come up related to how availability is affected by operations and maintenance of the data centers. And I have a strong belief that these will have a greater impact on keeping our data centers up and running than just design. So keep your eye open for standards which relate to operations and maintenance of the data center. Right now, there's some excellent content available from the Uptime Institute for facilities, operations, and maintenance for data centers, from Lee Technologies, which was later acquired by Schneider, called FORM, Facility Operations Maturity Model. My suggestion is if you're not already aware of these for your data centers, please get your teams aware and cognizant of what is the content and start mapping whether they have gaps in how they can robustify their operations and management of the data center better, because that has a bigger impact on availability in data centers. Finally, the build versus buy, and this is a decision I think all of us as a community struggle with when we are trying to look at the next data center that we need. Should we attempt to build it by ourselves? Should we have our facilities, real estate, and project teams deliver that as a project to us? Or should we go to something ready, visible, that we can touch and feel, assess, and put a very demanding SLA on and go ahead and buy? So if you look at the industry globally today, 7 out of 10 data centers in the world are on-premise, which means only 3 are buy, 7 are build. However, I believe within the next 5 years, okay, I'm not talking 10 years, within the next 5 years, this ratio is going to reverse. And the reason for it is obviously, one is there's this whole, adoption of the cloud that's happening globally. More importantly, in the India context, how many people in this room have had their teams actually build data centers? Could you raise your hands? Great. Now, another quick poll. How many of you believe it was an easy project to execute and you actually did it on time, on budget, and as per quality? Honestly. Okay, I'm very impressed. There are a few folks here. Usually it's a much lesser show of hands. What happens is, it is very difficult to put together a data center. It is a very challenging task. In India especially, it is even more so challenging. And I am very proud Indian, but there is this very interesting study which I always reference. It's an annual data center risk index, which is published by Cushman and Wakefield, where they look at how difficult is it to build a data center in 34 countries across the world, typically countries where data centers get built. And as of last year, I know some of you know the answer to this. Take a guess. Where do you think India was ranked out of these 34 countries? Any guesses? Well, some of you who've read the survey know that we were ranked 33 out of 34. We are the second most difficult country in the world to build data centers in. And with this context, especially, and they do it on the basis of several indices, including ease of doing business, GDP per capita, cost of energy, availability of the required quantum of power, green power, and so on. With this context, I think it becomes especially significant for our industry in India that we are going to see the transition from build towards buy even more speedily and more so. Okay? So my suggestion is for your next data center project that you do, please carefully assess whether you want to go to it yourself or you want to go to someone who's built frequently, builds large, and has built several data centers already, carries that experience under the belt, and possibly can give you a ready facility which you can assess, evaluate, score, and then move into immediately.